right, let's talk about a really critical setting inside of Cisco ACI, VMM domain immediacy. Look, if you've ever hooked up a virtual environment inside ACI, you've definitely come across this choice. And getting it right, well, it's absolutely key to balancing how available your network is versus how efficiently you're using your resources. So let's break down what these settings are really all about. So what's the big deal here? At the end of the day, it all boils down to this fundamental trade-off, right? Do you want to prepare your network for traffic that might show up, making sure it's instantly available? Or do you want to be more efficient and wait until that traffic actually appears before you start dedicating valuable network resources to it? That's the core puzzle we're going to solve today. Okay, so let's get our bearings real quick. Up top, you've got the APIC. That's our controller, our single source of truth. It pushes all the policy down to the leaf switches. Now, those leaf switches, they're connected to our hypervisors, and that's where all our VMs live. The settings we're about to get into, they control the when, as in when exactly do the APIC's policies get lit up on those physical switch ports that connect to this whole virtual world. So here's our game plan. We're going to start with what's called resolution immediacy. That's all about VLANs, and we'll look at its three options. Then we'll shift gears and cover a related but different concept, deployment immediacy. And finally, we'll tie it all together to help you build the perfect strategy for your network. All right, let's dive right into our first big concept, resolution immediacy. I want you to just think about one thing here, the VLAN. This setting answers one simple but crucial question. When exactly should ACI make a VLAN available on a physical switch port? So here's the official take. When you connect an EPG, your application group, to a VMM domain, this setting, resolution immediacy, is the master controller for when the VLANs for that EPG get pushed down to the leaf switch ports. It's all about the timing of that VLAN provisioning on the interfaces that are plugged into your hypervisors. And here is exactly what it looks like inside the APIC. When you're setting up that VMM domain association, you're faced with this drop-down menu with three choices: pre-provision, immediate, and on-demand. Now, each one behaves very differently, and you'd use them for totally different reasons. So let's take a closer look at each one. Okay, now we're going to really break down these three options. And trust me, understanding the difference between them is absolutely fundamental if you want to manage your ACI Fabric's resources without pulling your hair out. First up is pre-provision. The best way to think about this is as the always-on option. The second you configure this, ACI blasts that VLAN out to every single port that's part of the associated AEP. It's perfect for those supercritical services, like, say, your vCenter, that have to be reachable no matter what. But there's a pretty obvious trade-off, right? You're using up VLAN resources everywhere, which means you could run out. Next, we've got immediate. Now, this one's a bit smarter. The VLAN only gets deployed when the ACI leaf switch actually sees a hypervisor on its port, and it does this using discovery protocols like CDP or LLDP. Now, the key here, and this is important, is that the communication has to be bidirectional. ACI needs to hear back from the hypervisor before it pushes that VLAN. This makes it a fantastic, solid choice for most of your standard workloads. And finally, there's on-demand, which is by far the most efficient of the bunch. This one has a two-step trigger. First, just like immediate mode, it has to detect a hypervisor on the port using CDP or LLDP. But, and this is the big difference, it then waits for a second thing to happen. At least one VM has to actually be powered on and connected to that port group. Only when both of those conditions are true does ACI finally deploy the VLAN. This is the absolute best for conserving your VLAN resources. Okay, let's hit the pause button and switch gears for a minute. We've been talking all about getting the VLAN to the physical port. But now we need to talk about something completely different, though just as important: deployment immediacy. This has nothing to do with the VLAN. This is all about programming the policy into the switch's high-speed hardware itself. So once a policy gets downloaded from the APIC to the leaf switch software, deployment immediacy is what decides when that policy gets programmed into the hardware policy CAM, or TCAM. You can think of the TCAM as the switch's high-speed brain, the thing that enforces all your rules at line rate. So this setting is all about managing that very powerful and very finite hardware resource. And just like we saw before, here's where you find it in the APIC GUI, sitting right there above the resolution settings. And you can see this time we only have two choices, immediate or on-demand. Let's see how they stack up. So let's break down these two hardware options. The choice you make here really comes down to a direct trade-off between first packet latency on one side and optimizing your hardware resources on the other. The difference here is actually pretty simple. With immediate, the policy gets slammed into the hardware the moment it arrives at the switch. This guarantees zero latency for that very first packet of a new flow. With on-demand, the policy just kind of chills in software, and it only gets programmed into the hardware when the switch sees the first actual data packet that needs it. This, as you can imagine, is the absolute best way to optimize that precious hardware cam space. Okay, so now we have all the puzzle pieces. Resolution, deployment, how do we put them together and build a smart, coherent strategy for our applications? Let's quickly recap the key differences. If you remember just one thing from all of this, please make it this right here. Resolution is about making the VLAN available on the physical switch port. Deployment is about making the security and forwarding rules active in the high-speed hardware. They are two separate functions, managing two totally separate types of resources. This table really is the perfect cheat sheet. It pulls everything together. For resolution immediacy, the question you're asking is, when is the VLAN available on the port? And your choice there is all about balancing availability versus conserving VLANs. For deployment immediacy, the question is, when is the policy active in the hardware? And there, you're balancing first packet latency against optimizing your hardware TCAM space. And that really brings us to the final question, the one for you. Think about it. For a mission-critical database server, you might just choose resolution pre-provision and deployment immediate. You want it always on and always fast. But for thousands of VDI desktops, you'd almost certainly set both to on-demand to save resources. The real power of ACI is having this granular level of control. The key is knowing how and, more importantly, when to use it. Thanks so much for tuning in.